I stared at the bank counter as if the glass pane might crack open and reveal a different truth. But the teller's voice remained steady, polite, painfully neutral. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. The account you're asking about has a balance of $42. $42. Out of 15,000. I felt the floor tilt under me. Not violently. More like a slow, sickening realization that the last 3 years had been built on a lie I wanted so badly to believe. My fingers tightened around the folder I had brought. 3 years of transfers, text messages, promises, reassurances. All of it neat, orderly, documented. Proof of trust. Proof of naivety. "I'd like a printed statement," I heard myself say. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded like a woman underwater, speaking through layers of disbelief. The teller nodded and turned away. Behind me, the small-town branch murmured with the low hum of Thursday afternoon business. People depositing paychecks, retirees chatting with the manager. Ordinary life, oblivious to the quiet implosion happening at window 3. When the paper slid across the counter, my pulse thudded once, deep and heavy. I forced myself to look. Line after line of withdrawals. Transfers to a checking account that wasn't mine. Purchases I didn't make. Then the final insult, an automatic withdrawal fee for insufficient funds. My mother had said it was temporary. She had said she'd return every cent. She had said she just needed a safe place to hold the money. And I, God help me, I had believed her. The teller's voice drifted into the haze around me. "Is there anything else I can assist you with?" No. There was nothing anyone could do right now. I folded the statement, slipped it into my folder, and walked out of the bank with the slow, deliberate movements of someone navigating a world that suddenly felt hostile. The air outside was bright, warm, and indifferent. October sunlight glinted off parked cars. People moved with that effortless confidence that comes from assuming the ground beneath them is stable. I used to move like that. I reached my car, closed the door, and let the silence swallow me whole. 3 years ago, I moved $15,000 into an account with my mother's name on it because she told me she needed it only for a few months. A banking issue, she claimed. Something about a transition between accounts. Nothing to worry about. "You know I'm good for it," she had said, waving her hand as if the sum were nothing. "It's just temporary." Temporary became a year. A year became 2. 2 quietly slid into 3. And now, $42. The betrayal sat cold in my chest, too heavy to name. A daughter shouldn't feel this kind of grief while her mother still lived. Yet there it was, sharp, metallic, blooming through my ribs. I drove home slowly, the printed statement burning like a brand in the glove compartment. By the time I parked in my driveway, one truth had settled with frightening clarity. My mother hadn't borrowed the money. She had taken it. And something deep within me, something older, quieter, wiser, finally whispered what I had refused to hear for years. It's time to stop trusting her words. It's time to start looking at the evidence. My name is Elaine Mercer, and I am 67 years old. At this stage in life, I thought I had learned every major lesson a person could learn, about trust, love, responsibility, boundaries. I believed age granted a kind of emotional immunity, a protective layer built from decades of mistakes and hard-earned wisdom. But betrayal, true betrayal, doesn't care how old you are. It slices through every layer, clean and merciless. I live alone in a modest cedar-sided house on the edge of a quiet New Hampshire town. The kind of place where the nights smell like pine and cold earth, and where autumn feels like a season the world slows down for. Widowed for 12 years now, I fill my days with small routines. Tending my vegetable garden, volunteering at the library, walking the trail behind my property that winds toward the river. These things ground me, give shape to time. My life isn't glamorous, but it's mine. It took decades to build the kind of stability that lets a person exhale. And that's partly why the $15,000 mattered so much. It wasn't luxury money. It wasn't vacation money. It wasn't even retirement padding money. It was security money. The kind that lets an older woman sleep at night without worrying about unexpected medical bills or home repairs or the slow, creeping expenses of aging. I grew up believing that family, especially a mother, was supposed to be a refuge. Someone who shielded you when you were small and stood beside you when you became grown. My mother, Marjorie, was complicated. Charming when she wished to be, sharp when she didn't. Growing up with her was like living in a house where the weather changed hour to hour. Some days sunny, some days storming. Even in adulthood, I'd learned to navigate her moods like a seasoned sailor reading tides. But I still believed, even with her flaws, that she loved me in her own prickly way. That she would never intentionally harm me. So when she told me 3 years ago that she needed help moving money while she sorted out her banking transition, I agreed. I agreed because daughters want to believe their mothers aren't capable of exploiting them. I agreed because I didn't want to seem unkind, suspicious, or ungrateful for the good moments we had. I agreed because I was raised to think saying no was a kind of betrayal in itself. At 67, you'd think I would recognize manipulation when I saw it. But love makes fools of us at every age. And hope. Hope is a powerful anesthetic. It numbs the edges of red flags until all you feel is the desire to believe. I remember the exact day I transferred the money. We sat at her kitchen table, the one with the peeling white paint she refused to replace because it was perfectly good. She sipped her tea while I logged into my account, the steam curling around her face like a gentle veil. "It's just temporary, sweetheart," she had said. "A few months at most. You know I'd pay you back the second everything clears." I believed her. God help me, I believed her. Now, looking back from the vantage point of the bank statement in my glove compartment, I realized something chilling. Her voice had been too smooth. Her smile too practiced. Her gratitude too effortless. As if she'd rehearsed the whole thing. But back then, I still trusted the woman who raised me. And I had no idea what that trust was about to cost. Families rarely break in sudden, obvious ways. More often they fracture quietly, along old lines no one wants to acknowledge, until one day the crack is too wide to step over. My family was no different. I am the oldest of 3 daughters. Claire, the middle child, lives 2 states away and calls only when she needs something. Usually emotional cleanup after another failed relationship. Jenna, the youngest, lives 20 minutes from our mother and has perfected the role of the good daughter. She brings groceries when it suits her, posts affectionate birthday tributes on social media, and stays just close enough to be praised but far enough to avoid any actual responsibility. And then there's me. The steady one. The reliable one. The daughter who steps in when something needs fixing. My mother always said I had a head for details. But what she really meant was that I became the family's default caretaker the moment I turned 15. I managed bills she forgot to pay, handled paperwork she misplaced, and soothed the emotional storms she stirred up with a careless word or a simmering resentment. People on the outside always described her as charismatic, radiant even. She knew how to charm when she wanted to. But inside the family, her charm had teeth. It wasn't malicious, not exactly. But it carried an edge that reminded you loyalty was expected, not earned. Growing up, I learned that keeping the peace meant absorbing the impact of her moods without complaint. By adulthood, that habit had calcified into something dangerous, a reflex to minimize my own needs and defer to hers. 3 years ago, when she asked to temporarily hold my savings, she phrased it as though refusing would be a kind of abandonment. "You're the only one I can trust with something like this, Elaine." One sentence, and I was 15 again, wanting to be the dependable daughter, the one who didn't disappoint. My sisters had opinions about the situation, though none of them were brave enough to say them plainly. When I mentioned the arrangement to Jenna, she laughed lightly and said, "Well, if Mom says she needs it, she must have her reasons." Which was her way of saying she didn't want to be involved. Claire, hearing about it over the phone, sucked her teeth and muttered, "I wouldn't mix money with Mom, but you do what you want." Which was her way of washing her hands of it. Neither volunteered to help, advise, or warn. Neither offered a moment of solidarity. That's the thing about being the responsible one. You get respect for it, but you get isolation too. And my mother. She reveled in the dynamic. She liked the feeling of being central, of her daughters orbiting her gravitational pull. She liked the subtle competition it created. But despite all of this, I still wanted a relationship with her. Some part of me held on to this hope that with age, she might soften. That we could build something steadier, kinder, more honest. That hope is why I didn't question the unusual request. It's why I kept giving her time. It's why, as months turned into a year, then 2, then 3, I accepted excuse after excuse. Oh, the bank is still sorting it. There was another delay. I'll give it back soon. Stop worrying so much. She said these things with the confidence of a woman who had learned, over a lifetime, that I wouldn't push back. And I didn't. Not yet. Because when you grow up managing the emotional weather of a parent, you learn to endure storms you should have never been asked to walk through. But even I had limits. And the bank statement tucked in my glove compartment was about to drag every old dynamic into the light, whether my family was ready for it or not. The day everything truly snapped into focus came 6 months before that awful moment at the bank. I didn't recognize it as the turning point then. Betrayal rarely announces itself, but when I look back now, the signs were unmistakable. My mother had invited me over for dinner. She did that occasionally, usually when she wanted something. Her house was the same as always. Warm lighting, the faint smell of lavender and old books, a kitchen cluttered with mugs she refused to throw out. She greeted me with effusive affection, the kind that felt like a performance she was staging for an invisible audience. During dinner she talked endlessly, about her bridge group, about a neighbor's dog, about the humidity. Not once did she mention the money. Not the account. Not the temporary situation that had stretched far beyond anything reasonable. Finally, as we cleared the plates, I nudged the subject gently. So, about the transfer we talked about last month. You said things were finally settling with the bank. Any updates? She paused, her back to me as she wiped the counter. A small, impatient flick of her wrist. Oh, that. They're still dragging their feet. Bureaucracy, you know how it is. Her tone was dismissive. Too dismissive. I'd really appreciate some clarity, Mom. It's been almost 3 years. She turned, leaning one hip against the counter, arms crossed. The transformation was subtle but immediate. The warmth evaporated, replaced by a thin, defensive sharpness. Elaine, must you always be so anxious? I told you I'd handle it. Why are you making such a fuss? A fuss. That word struck me like a slap. I'm not making a fuss. I'm asking about my money. She waved a hand, almost annoyed. You act like I spent it. Her eyes darted away for the briefest second. A flinch. A tell. It was the first time I felt a twisting unease in my stomach, an instinct whispering that something had gone horribly wrong. But the breaking point didn't come until later that night. I left her house unsettled, driving home under a sky the color of wet slate. Rain streaked the windshield, rhythmically tapping out a warning I didn't yet understand. I made tea, sat in my living room, and decided to check the account online. I entered the login information. The page loaded. And what I saw made my breath stop entirely. The balance was far, far lower than I remembered. Not zero, but shockingly close. I scrolled through the transactions, my pulse pounding. The withdrawals were small at first. 20 here, 50 there. Then larger ones. Hundreds. 1,000. Another 1,000. Transfers labeled with reference codes I didn't recognize. My mother had been siphoning off the money slowly, quietly, steadily, for nearly 2 years. Not for bills. Her bills were paid. Not for emergencies. There were none. Not for anything she ever mentioned. It was a pattern. A deliberate one. I sat frozen, the glow of the laptop screen casting long shadows across the room. The air felt heavy, swollen with disbelief. Something inside me, some old, loyal part, tried to rationalize it. Maybe she needed help and didn't want to say so. Maybe she intended to pay it back. Maybe. But the truth was right there on the screen. Line after line of betrayal. I closed the laptop slowly, as though shutting it might erase the truth. It didn't. The next morning I called her, not confrontationally, just wanting an explanation. She didn't answer. An hour later, I tried again. Still nothing. By evening, she sent a single text. "I'm busy. We'll talk later." But we didn't talk. Not for weeks. And during those weeks, something hardened inside me. Not anger exactly, but clarity. A solemn recognition that this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a theft, carried out by the one person I had spent my entire life trying to please. And deep down, I knew, if I wanted the truth, I would have to go looking for it myself. The thing about betrayal is that once you finally allow yourself to see it, the evidence doesn't hide anymore. It sits in plain sight, waiting for you to stop making excuses long enough to look directly at it. After weeks of silence from my mother, I realized I couldn't rely on her to explain anything. She had no intention of talking, let alone returning the money. So I did what I've always done in moments of uncertainty. I gathered information. It began quietly, almost methodically. Each morning I brewed a cup of tea, sat at my dining table, and opened my laptop. I went through the statements line by line, creating a spreadsheet to track every withdrawal and transfer. Patterns emerged. Specific dates. Regular intervals. Occasional spikes that aligned with holidays or times I knew she had been hosting friends. Even a luxury purchase at a store she once swore she'd never waste money in. It was astonishing how clearly the timeline painted itself once I stopped trying to blur it. Next, I dug through my phone. Texts, voicemails, emails. I compiled every message where she assured me the money was untouched, or that the transfer delay was almost resolved, or that she would return it soon. Reading the messages in sequence was like watching a slow unraveling of trust one didn't realize had already snapped. I didn't want to involve a lawyer. The idea felt heavy, almost inappropriate. Who hires a lawyer against their own mother? But the deeper I looked, the more obvious it became that sentiment wasn't going to fix this. And I had lived too many years shrinking myself to keep the peace. So one afternoon I made an appointment with a local attorney known for handling financial disputes. His office was in a restored brick building downtown, warm and orderly, with the faint scent of espresso lingering in the air. He introduced himself as Jonathan Hale, a man in his early 50s with silver at his temples and a calm, analytical presence. The type of person who listens more than he speaks. When I finished explaining the situation, he steepled his fingers and regarded me with a level, almost gentle seriousness. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "what you've described is not a misunderstanding. It's financial exploitation." The words hit harder than I expected. "I'm not trying to hurt my mother," I murmured. "I just want the truth. And my money back." "That's understandable. But you need documentation. Clear, organized evidence. Once we have that, we can determine the best approach, formal or informal." "Informal?" I asked. "Meaning," he said carefully, "that sometimes a strongly worded letter from counsel is enough to prompt repayment or cooperation, but only if the other party fears escalation." My mother was many things, but fearless wasn't one of them. She responded to authority the way some people respond to cold water: sharp intake of breath, immediate discomfort, retreat. Jonathan handed me a checklist. Bank records. Transfer histories. Screenshots of every message. A written timeline. Any evidence of refusal or evasion. I already had most of it. As I organized the documents into an expandable file, a strange peace settled over me. Not the kind that comes from resolution, but the kind that comes from clarity. I wasn't acting out of spite. I wasn't acting out of revenge. I was simply protecting myself, something I had rarely done in the context of my family. Still, I hesitated before the final step, contacting the bank for a full printed history of the account. That hesitation is what led me, weeks later, to stand at the teller window and hear the words that confirmed everything. "Ma'am, the balance is $42. That statement became the final piece of evidence. The missing puzzle corner. When I handed Jonathan the updated file, he studied it silently, then looked up at me with a heavy, measured breath. "Elaine," he said, "your mother didn't borrow your money. She appropriated it. Systematically." I nodded. I already knew. But hearing it spoken aloud made something inside me settle with cold finality. "This," Jonathan continued, "is the point where you decide how far you're willing to go." And I knew, without a tremor this time, that I was ready. Not for revenge. For truth. And for justice. The turning point didn't arrive with fireworks or fury. It came quietly, like a click inside my chest, a small but decisive shift that changed the direction of everything. It happened the morning after I delivered the final documents to Jonathan. I woke before sunrise, the house still wrapped in that fragile early blue light, and sat on the edge of my bed feeling both wrung out and strangely weightless. For the first time in months, I wasn't tangled in doubt. I wasn't trying to reinterpret my mother's excuses or rescue her from choices she had made freely. I was simply done. Done tiptoeing. Done shrinking. Done protecting a woman who had not protected me. I brewed a cup of strong coffee and stood by the kitchen window, watching the first thin line of gold stretch across the treetops. And I made a decision, not impulsively, not in anger, but with the calm resolve of someone who has finally stepped into the truth. I would confront her. But not emotionally. Not in the old patterns she relied on, where she twisted my words, played the victim, or made me feel guilty for asking for what was mine. No. This time, the confrontation would be documented, measured, supported by evidence, and witnessed by a lawyer. Ethical revenge isn't about hurting someone. It's about restoring balance. Jonathan drafted the letter that same week. It was professional, firm, and free of any emotional language. Exactly the opposite of how my family usually communicated. It outlined the total amount taken, the timeline of transactions, and the legal classification of those withdrawals. It stated clearly that repayment was expected within 30 days or formal proceedings would begin. I read the letter 3 times before giving permission to send it. Seeing the betrayal reduced to dates and numbers, neatly itemized, stripped of sentiment, was its own kind of reckoning. Jonathan sent the letter via certified mail to ensure she couldn't claim she hadn't received it. 3 days later, my phone rang. I stared at the screen. "Mom." Her voice, when I answered, was high and sharp, the tone she used whenever she felt cornered. "What is this nonsense you had delivered to my house?" "It's not nonsense," I said evenly. "It's documentation." "You're threatening me? Your own mother? Over a misunderstanding?" "There was no misunderstanding." She scoffed, a brittle, humorless sound. "You're being dramatic, Elaine. I told you I'd pay you back. I just need more time. You've had 3 years. And you know I've been dealing with things." I breathed in slowly, letting her words wash past me instead of into me. "What things?" I asked. "You never told me about anything." "Not once." She faltered for a moment, just long enough for me to hear the truth behind the silence. There had been no crisis. No emergency. No need. She had taken the money because she assumed she could. When she didn't respond, I continued. "Mom, you need to repay the $15,000. Jonathan's letter gives the details. The deadline is 30 days. Her voice dropped into a low, wounded tremor. "I can't believe you're doing this to me. After everything I've done for you." A familiar line. A familiar tactic. But this time, it didn't pierce. "After everything I've done for you," I replied quietly, "this is the bare minimum." There was a long, electric silence. Then she hung up. I expected to feel shaken, but instead I felt something else, something clean and steady. I had finally spoken without fear. In the days that followed, the family began circling. Claire texted vague worries. Jenna left a voicemail accusing me of escalating things unnecessarily. Neither asked how I was. Neither asked what Mom had done. But I didn't budge. The old patterns no longer fit. The old roles no longer applied. The ground beneath me, once so fragile, felt newly solid. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to my family's behavior. I was defining my own. And that was the moment, quiet, firm, irrevocable, when the tide turned. My mother did not respond to the letter. Not in writing, not by phone, not through any gesture resembling accountability. Instead, she did what she had always done when confronted. She rewrote the story in her head until she became the victim. Within a week, I heard from Jenna. "She's devastated, Elaine," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured indignation. "How could you sick a lawyer on her? She's our mother." "I didn't sick anyone on her," I replied. "I asked for my money back." "She didn't steal from you." "Then she can return it," I said calmly. "All 15,000 of it." A long, brittle silence followed. Then Jenna hung up without another word. 2 days later, Claire called. "I'm staying out of it," she announced immediately, which was, of course, her way of being involved. "But Mom says she never agreed to a deadline." "She agreed when she took the money." Another silence. Then quietly Claire said, "I think she's scared." "So am I admitted. But being scared doesn't undo what happened." Despite their attempts to shame or pressure me, I didn't waver. And slowly, very slowly, the consequences began to unfold. On day 12, my mother showed up at my door unannounced. I opened it to find her standing stiffly, wearing a coat far too thin for the cold. Her makeup was flawless, but her eyes looked rattled. She brushed past me into the house without waiting for an invitation, the way she always had. "I can't believe you're making this public," she snapped. "It's not public," I said. "It's legal." She thrust a folded piece of paper at me, a handwritten note. "This is all I can give you right now." I unfolded it. $300. 300. Out of 15,000. "This isn't repayment," I said gently. "It's a start." "No. A start would have been honesty 3 years ago." Her composure cracked then. Her voice shook with that familiar blend of indignation and fragility she wielded like a weapon. "You're punishing me," she whispered. "No. I'm holding you accountable. They're not the same. For me, they are." Her face hardened, freezing into a mask I recognized all too well, the expression she wore whenever someone refused to bend to her will. And then she delivered the line I had been expecting. "You'll regret this, Elaine." I nodded once. "I already regretted trusting you." Her breath hitched. She stepped back, wounded, not by the situation, but by the fact that her usual tools weren't working. She left without another word. After she was gone, I sent Jonathan an email summarizing the interaction. He replied within the hour, advising that the partial payment should be documented and logged. He also noted, with professional caution, that her behavior suggested she understood the gravity of the situation. In the weeks that followed, small cracks appeared in the facade she projected to the world. Her bridge group quietly distanced themselves when she tried to paint me as the villain. A mutual acquaintance mentioned she had been whispering about unfair accusations, but no one seemed convinced. Even Jenna, who clung to Mom's version of events with childish devotion, grew quieter about the matter. People weren't taking her side. They were simply watching. And that was what unsettled her most. Avoidance had always been her shield, charm her sword. But charm can't erase bank records. Tears can't undo documented withdrawals. And silence, her favorite defense, only confirmed the truth in the eyes of anyone paying attention. On day 31, after the repayment deadline passed with no progress, Jonathan filed the formal notice of intent. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't vindictive. It was a slow, inevitable tightening of consequences around a woman who had spent her whole life believing consequences didn't apply to her. Her downfall wasn't a collapse. It was an erosion, the quiet crumbling of control she once held over everyone around her. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. When Jonathan filed the notice of intent, something subtle shifted, not in the legal process, but inside me. I had expected to feel triumphant, or afraid, or conflicted. Instead, what settled over me was a quiet steadiness, like a room finally cleared of smoke. The legal next steps moved slowly, as these things usually do. Weeks passed. Winter crept in, frosting the edges of my windows each morning. The house felt still, peaceful, almost contemplative. And for the first time in a long while, I felt that way too. I stopped replaying old conversations with my mother in my mind, searching for clues I missed or moments I should have responded differently. The past no longer felt like a puzzle I was meant to solve. It felt like a story I had finally stopped trying to rewrite. My sisters remained distant. Jenna sent short, clipped messages, mostly questions about the legal timeline, none about my well-being. Claire called once, sounding tired, as though she were caught somewhere between loyalty and avoidance. She offered no advice, no judgment, just a soft, "I hope you're taking care of yourself." I was. In ways they didn't expect. Most mornings I walked the trail behind my house, the cold air stinging my cheeks, the river murmuring alongside me like a companion who asked for nothing. I sorted through my emotions as I walked. Grief, relief, sorrow, resolve. They existed together, layered and honest. One afternoon, while sorting through papers for my appointment with Jonathan, I found a photo of my mother and me taken when I was about 8. She was holding my shoulders, smiling brightly. I was beaming, proud just to be near her. My throat tightened. The betrayal hurt so deeply because the love had once been real. Even damaged things begin with roots. But loving someone doesn't mean allowing them to harm you. And forgiveness, true forgiveness, can't exist without accountability. When the preliminary hearing date arrived, my mother didn't appear. Her lawyer, a man I had never met, requested an extension. Jonathan expected it. These delays were part of the dance. 2 weeks later, my mother sent another envelope. This one held $900. No note. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just another fraction of the debt she owed. Jonathan set it aside with the others. "Partial payments are admissions," he said. "They strengthen the case." I nodded. But strangely, the money itself mattered less and less. What mattered was the truth being acknowledged, documented, validated, no longer something my family could dismiss as misunderstandings. One evening, as I sat by the fireplace with a blanket around my shoulders, my phone buzzed. A text from Mom. "You've ruined our relationship. I hope you're satisfied." I read it twice, waiting for the familiar sting. It didn't come. Instead, I typed slowly. I didn't ruin anything. I revealed what was already broken. I didn't send it. Some words are meant only to be said to oneself. What I did send was simpler. "I hope you choose to do the right thing." She didn't respond. But something inside me loosened then, a tight knot that had lived under my ribs for years. I no longer felt responsible for her choices. I no longer felt the old obligation to absorb her guilt, soften her consequences, or repair what she continually fractured. The truth was this: I had stepped out of the role she wrote for me. And in doing so, I had stepped into my own life, one that wasn't defined by fear or duty, or the fragile hope that this time my mother might behave differently. As the snow settled outside and the legal process moved forward, I realized I wasn't waiting for her repayment anymore. I was waiting for something far more important: my own freedom from the past. And without realizing it, I had already begun to claim it. The legal process stretched into early spring, slow, methodical, unremarkable in its progression, yet deeply symbolic in what it represented. My mother eventually agreed to a structured repayment plan through her attorney. Not out of remorse, of course, but because she realized the alternative would expose far more than she was willing to reveal. Her pride could stomach many things, but public record was not one of them. When Jonathan informed me of the agreement, I felt a quiet finality settle over me. Not triumph. Not sorrow. Something gentler. Something earned. The payments weren't immediate, and they weren't large, but they were consistent. Documented. Traceable. An acknowledgement, however begrudging, of wrongdoing. I didn't frame it as victory. I framed it as restoration. A rebalancing of something that had been tilted far too long. In the end, though, the money was never the heart of the story. The true cost, and the true reward, lay in what the journey forced me to confront. For most of my life, I believed forgiveness meant tolerance. That love required endurance. That protecting someone else's comfort was more important than protecting my own stability. I thought being a good daughter meant absorbing disappointment, smoothing conflict, silencing myself. But age, if we allow it, teaches us differently. One crisp morning in March, I walked the trail behind my house. The river had shed its ice, flowing freely again, as if relieved of a weight it had carried all winter. I sat on the wooden bench overlooking the bend in the water and let the quiet wrap around me. I thought of my mother, not the woman she became in adulthood, but the one I knew as a child. The one who read to me at night. The one who braided my hair for school pictures. The one who once held my trembling hand during a thunderstorm and said, "You're safe with me." I realized I could love that version of her without excusing the woman she later chose to be. And I realized something else, something that took nearly 7 decades to understand. Boundaries are not punishments. They are acts of love for oneself. I hadn't sought revenge. That was never the point. What I sought was truth. Clear, documented truth. Because clarity is the only foundation strong enough to build peace upon. Ethical revenge, if we can call it that, is simply this: letting the truth do what manipulation never can. Letting consequences speak when sentiment fails. Letting accountability replace silence. My mother and I spoke only once more in person. It was brief, awkward, tinged with the brittle politeness of two people standing on opposite sides of a long, complicated history. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, spiritually. As though the scaffolding of excuses she'd built around herself had finally begun to crack. "I hope you're happy," she said quietly. "I'm not happy," I replied. "But I am at peace." She didn't argue. For the first time in years, she didn't try to rewrite the narrative. She simply nodded, gathered her purse, and left. That was the moment I realized closure doesn't always come with reconciliation. Sometimes closure is just the absence of chaos. Now, as I share this story, I'm not seeking sympathy. I'm offering perspective, especially to anyone who has been taught that loyalty must come at the cost of self-respect. Here is the truth I learned. You can love someone and still say no. You can forgive someone and still enforce consequences. You can honor the past and still protect your future. And you can walk away, not in anger, but in clarity. If you ever find yourself in a situation where someone insists, it's just temporary, and years later you're still waiting, remember this: temporary is a promise. Accountability is a choice. And you are allowed, at any age, to choose yourself.